No, they have. Hello? Hi there. Good morning. And welcome to day 2 of the Summer Institute. It's really nice to see all of you back here in the auditorium. I know yesterday was a long and intense day, but I hope the learning was rich and meaningful for you and you're ready for another great day. Just a couple of very quick housekeeping announcements. This beautiful sweater was found in the parking lot. If anyone dropped it or if you recognize it as a friend or colleagues, I'll have it in the Great Hall. We also found a ring was turned in and a notebook that says U.S. Army on the front was turned in. All of those things will be in the Great Hall. Other housekeeping announcements, just a reminder to check out of your room at your earliest convenience, and you can drop your key at Mary Hall. Would you please, because we just really have a heart for the earth and for being good stewards of our funding, the lanyard is your lovely parting gift and souvenir from the Summer Institute, but if you wouldn't mind just turning in the plastic sleeve of your name tag to your volunteer that's in your room, that would be really greatly appreciated. It looks like Christopher and I are taking bets. My weather app says we are expecting rain. His weather app says sunny. So we're going with Christopher's, okay? So unless it is really impossible to be sitting outside at noon, the barbecue will go forward as planned. So without further ado, yeah, exactly. We're just going to do our quick summer prize drawing, and then I'm going to turn the mic back over to Christopher. Okay.
There are little ones in there, remember?
Okay. So I'm going to start with a little one. Okay. We're starting with a little one. Lois Long, are you here? Where is she? She's not here? Huh? Well, if she's not here, she doesn't get to win. You must be present to win. Okay. Okay, here we go. We're still on Abby Pancook? Are you here, Abby? All right. Okay. The s'more kit is yours, Abby. Marianne DeRuyter, are you not here? Oh, you guys, you're killing me. Okay. Connie Ishens, are you here? Connie's here? All right, Connie, you are the winner of the M is for Minnesota book. We're moving up the food chain. Now is the Summer Institute color swimming towel. Shelley Miller? All right, Shelley. Okay.
Another little one? No, that's okay.
Okay. That's right. And now for the picnic blanket. Stephanie Leshka? Are you here? All right, Stephanie, way to go. Okay, without any further ado, I'm turning the mic over to Christopher. Thanks, everybody, for coming this year. I hope we see you next year, and have a really great summer with your families and just enjoying our beautiful state. Take care.
Well, good morning. It gives me a particularly great pleasure to be able to introduce Kate Gallagher, who's our speaker this morning. Kate spoke at the Early Childhood Special Ed Coordinators Conference last fall at Rutgers, and that was my first introduction to her and her work, and we were all quite taken with both of those things, both she and her work. So we invited her to join us this summer. For the last 8 years, my research has focused on reflective practice, and it's a particular type of reflective practice that comes out of early childhood infant and early childhood mental health. This reflective supervision or consultation helps providers, professionals, link their own and others' behavior to their life experiences, their thoughts, and their emotions that arise from those experiences. The data that results from this process is used to deliver services that match the child and family's needs. And a primary emphasis is on relationships, maintaining healthy relationships and repairing them when they go awry. That's the first goal of reflective practice. The second is to support professionals as they meet the challenges and deal with the stressors of their work, maintaining their sense of self-efficacy as they, or you in this case, go about their day-to-day work with families and colleagues, which connects directly to Kate's work. There you are. You moved. Kate is on faculty at the University of Nebraska Kearney, and you can read more about her work in the packet, your conference packet. In addition to teaching and research, one aspect of Kate's work is focused on enhancing the early childhood systems and workforce. The title of her work, or her talk today, is Be Well to Do Well, What It Means to Flourish for Children, for Families, and Professionals. Kate. Thanks. Do you want a sweater? No. Okay.
All right. Thank you, Christopher, for that lovely introduction. Thank you, Deb and team, for organizing an extraordinary conference. I had a great day yesterday. It was an intense day, and so I ended it with a walk along the path along that lake. Minnesota is so beautiful. So beautiful. So here's, yep, good. All right. I get to take this up. All right. Everybody can hear? Beautiful. And good morning. I am really excited to be here today to help you think about yourself. To be what sometimes we think of, because in our field we're so busy thinking about others, and quite frankly, as a profession guided by being feminine and femaleness, we are also often obsessed with caring for others. And so I'm going to encourage you this morning to think about yourself, to think a little what we sometimes default to as selfishly. And I'm going to share some positive ideas, and I'm going to share some, let's call them realistic ideas about us and our profession. And to ground this a little bit, I started my career working as a teacher assistant in early intervention while I was still in college, and then graduated and worked in that same program, working with toddlers who were had disabilities or were at risk for disabilities. And I often tell audiences that I had many student loans. I was a first-generation college student, and I paid for college myself and had a lot of student loans, and bartended to support my teaching habit in Milwaukee. So I have walked this walk and have since worked in childcare, taught kindergarten, and lived the life of an early childhood professional, proudly and with some of the same joys and challenges. So let's get started. All right. Turn it on. Good. All right. My throat's a little scratchy. I appear to be getting a little airplane-related cold, so forgive any little glitches I have here. All right. So what do we know? We know, because we talk about it all the time, and rightfully so, that healthy brain development relies on healthy relationships, as Christopher just described, and on high-quality interactions. That's how the relationships emerge, and the interactions emerge in those healthy relationships. We know that high-quality interactions rely on healthy adults. We say this a lot about families, and we need to think about it with ourselves. And finally, we know it's hard to be healthy. It just is. Show of hands, who finds it super easy to be healthy? That's what I thought. Okay, just curious. We were all going to turn at you and scowl a little, but okay, yeah. So it is hard to be healthy. It is not this thing that comes easily. So we're going to think about several things. The first is, what is well-being? We've been throwing it around a lot. I want to kind of flesh apart a little bit what it is. What is stress? That's an easy one for us to answer, but I'm going to pose an alternative definition that might help reframe it. Why does it matter? We're going to reflect on a little bit how we're doing as a profession and think about some promising next steps. Because while we're waiting for society to catch up and realize that we are the superheroes, we really need to be taking care of ourselves and making sure that we take care of each other as well. And so we've got some ideas for how we might do that. So we're going to talk about understanding health and stress. We're going to talk about enhancing individual resilience because it's really important to take care of ourselves. But we're also going to talk about enhancing systemic resilience. It's not enough for us to really take great care of ourselves and then walk into a workplace that's not healthy, right? We need to focus on both simultaneously, just like we focus on children and the system in which they live, right? We focus on children without families. How well do we do? Not at all. We focus on ourselves and our own health without focusing on our systems that we work in. Won't work at all. So, here's a definition of health that's from the Center for the Developing Child at Harvard University. I'll give you a second to read that. I like that it focuses on not talking about illness or absence of illness, but a individually based resource that helps us handle life. Changes the meaning of health a little bit, doesn't it? And that we talk about promoting successful development. It takes a lot more into account than the cold I'm getting or the back pain you might have. It goes far beyond that and looks at overall health, overall ability to handle the challenges of everyday life. So what's well-being, and is it different? Carol Riff at the University of Wisconsin has posed a really interesting idea that she's been researching for years on what it means to be well as an adult, what it means to flourish. And she poses that healthy people that flourish, that are living life to the fullest and are well and healthy, have the following characteristics. They accept themselves as they are. It doesn't mean they don't want to improve, but they are generally self-accepting, as opposed to being self-critical or what's the word I want? Let's just say self-critical. That works just great. People who are flourishing focus on personal growth. You're here this week. You are focusing on growth in your professional life. But people who are well, who flourish, also focus on growth as a person. They have a purpose in life. This is something you all have. And this is something I'll show you a little data with later on that shows you this is a key characteristic of individuals who thrive in our field. People who are well, who flourish, have positive relationships with others, no surprise there. Feel some sense of mastery in their environment. They don't always think they're learning so much that they can't keep up. They have a sense of mastering their home and their work and their personal lives. They have some autonomy. They have the ability to do something on their own, make decisions, and carry them out. So that's thinking about what does it mean to be well? That's what Carol Riff says. And it makes sense for me. So what is stress? Usually I have a little thing that makes this pulse. Yeah, I do. That's what stress feels like. What does stress feel like? Usually we think about stress as something negative, right? Stress is something that I've got a lot of stress, I've got a lot going on, I've got to travel, I've got to go to a conference and then take care of family things, stress. Often our stress comes from competing challenges, right? Home is demanding this, work is demanding this, and I can't get both done. But the fact of the matter is, stress is life. Stress is life, which is actually one of the quotes attributed to the Buddha, interestingly enough. But stress has two pieces that are important to think about. The first is the biopsychosocial, okay, in our body. We are sensitive to certain kinds of things in the environment, and we have certain types of health. Have you noticed some people get strep throat and other people get colds? Some people get cancer and others get heart disease. It's unusual that someone gets everything because we have certain predispositions to certain types of health and certain types of illness. We have differences. But the fact of the matter is, no one doesn't have susceptibility to illness. No one doesn't have vulnerabilities in their health. We all do. It's part of our biopsychosocial makeup. So there's the stress that comes from within, just our own biological makeup. And then there's the contextual. Workplace, family, the people we love to love and the people we love to hate, right? Yeah. The people who help us feel good and safe, and simultaneously after about, 2.5 days? That's about 3 days for me, stress, right? Yeah. And social stressors, social expectations. And I'd argue that in this field, we tend to feel a lot of stress. We own the responsibility of making sure others are well and often forget to take care of our own wellness and stress. So I went looking for definitions of stress because when I've asked audiences what is stress, they say things like headache, my mother-in-law, right? They start describing biological and relational aspects of stress. Too much paperwork is a very common one, okay? Too much paperwork, right? Or too many demands, unrealistic demands, a boss who is not understanding. Stomach aches, my husband, right? So I went looking for a definition of stress and found a really interesting one that I think helps reframe it. And it was developed by a long time ago by a psychologist named Hans Selye. And he said, stress is the non-specific response of the body to any demand for change. Not big change, not negative change, any demand for change. By this definition, going from sitting to standing is stress. And on any given day it can be, right? Yeah. Moving from one room to another is stress. Think about that. Think about the toddler going from one room to the other room to go play in a gross motor room, right? Stress the whole way down the hallway, right? Transition, change of any type is stress. Kind of reframes it, right? Kind of puts it in the perspective of, so there's probably stress that's not so difficult and stress that's more difficult. Yeah? But it's all stress. The body doesn't distinguish all kinds of stress necessarily. It does distinguish ones it experiences traumatic, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. So think about stress that way. Stress is just the body's demand for change. So why do stress and well-being matter? What impact does it have on us, on our workforce? Especially sometimes since we try to hold our stress up as like a badge of honor, okay? So everyone knows this person. Oh my God, I've got so much to do this week. I mean, I've got my mother-in-law coming on Saturday, and I've got to get the house clean before that, and I've got to do some cooking because when she comes, I don't have time to cook. And on top of it, I have all my assessments due for the end of the semester, so I've got to get those in, and I still have things due for class. I don't know how I can do it with all these things. Yeah? Okay, it sounds like me sometime, I confess. Okay. But we hold our stressors sometimes up as badges of honor. Look how much I can get done. Yeah. So why is this important? Why is understanding what stress does to us? I can keep going and going and going and never get sick. Ha ha ha. Why does it matter? Why, though I agree that we are superheroes, why do we think we can do it all? And what impact does this have on us? So there's been a lot of research. And I got to tell you, this is awesome. Because this has been something I have been working on for probably about 8 to 10 years now, thinking about workforce well-being. And when I first started applying for grants to do some work related to it, people looked at me like I was crazy, all right? And in the meantime, some more savvy people have done some really fantastic research through IES, and then I'll tell you about some that I have done with some colleagues at Temple. So Tish Jennings, previous preschool teacher, and Mark Greenberg have developed a theory that they call, using a social emotional perspective, called the pro-social classroom. And in it, they're thinking about student outcomes, right? So they're looking, everything has to look at student outcomes because you cannot study teachers or early childhood professionals' well-being if you aren't making sure it has an impact on the children. They can't be well just for themselves, you know. Just like we can't take care of families just for themselves. It has to be to serve the child, right? Okay, whatever, yeah. So, it's just fascinating to me, just fascinating. But at the top of their model, where it all starts, is that teachers, they specifically are looking at teachers, need to have social emotional competence and well-being. Before anything gets started, before you get to the healthy classroom, before you get to these other important aspects of a healthy classroom, the teacher needs to be well. Good theory. And they've been looking a lot at mindfulness and yoga and different kinds of strategies that help teachers be well. And recently, if you've seen the tome, it's about 2 inches thick. The National Academy of Medicine and the Institute of Sciences put together a volume on our workforce, the need to transform it, and how we are trying hard but not achieving at the levels that we need to, which is okay, and we do. We need to support early childhood professional skill and development. Most notably, they're concerned because we don't have enough professionals, and you all have shared stories about how there is a real shortage of people in our field to do the high-quality work we need. But they did some fantastic work, and they included a chapter on workforce well-being. I hurriedly went to the chapter and found it super skinny, but super optimistic. In other words, they know it's important, and they know it's important. But they developed a model that I've really been sharing with a lot of folks because I really think it's important, because it's actually a little brilliant. So let me show it to you. Okay, it looks crazy, and you can't read it, so I'm going to tell you what's in the little boxes, okay? So the first thing, this is their idea for how to transform the workforce. And by the way, they still have the requisite child outcomes. We're still working for children. And don't get me wrong, I'm not objecting. That's exactly why we're here, is for children. But it's really okay to be healthy just for ourselves too. Just gonna throw that in, okay? So the first thing that is a wow for me is that the things most proximal to child outcomes, and again, Christopher, alluding to the work we care about so much, relationships and interactions with families, relationships, interactions with children, relationships, interactions with other professionals. Relationships they have as the single nearest important factor to child outcomes. I believe this has been the first time that this has been put in our early childhood big model. It shows up in mental health all the time. But it doesn't show up in the STEM work, okay? They're not looking at relationships as a result of kids' math and science learning. They should be, okay? So the great thing about this is here's the behaviors of the practitioners. We've got professional learning supports and policies over here. We've got this practice and working conditions, okay? So all these things that are supporting the workforce. At the center is well-being of the practitioner. Now, why I like this being at the center is that it doesn't merge out of anywhere, okay? It needs all these supports that are being set up, professional learning supports, policies, working conditions, knowledge and competencies of leadership, knowledge and competencies of the practitioner. Everything leads to the well-being, which leads to the behaviors, which leads to, ta-da, relationships. We're at the center. We don't get there without the supports, without the infrastructure, but nothing happens if we're not well. The relationships do not happen, the behaviors do not happen. So, again, they've laid out it's important, and it's important. So what can we do? And we've got some assumptions that the well-being of early childhood professions is impacted by our health and stress. There's that assumption straight up. We also know it impacts our emotion regulation, our relationships, and our teaching capacity. So that's a given. So let's step back a little bit and think about stress and what we know about it, because it's hard to control. It's hard to manage what you don't know, okay? So the first thing is stress is perceived in the brain. Now, I sometimes describe the brain as a kind of lazy organ because it loves patterns. And once it gets a pattern, it likes to stay there and keep it forever and ever and ever, okay? So it's why, in fact, we find in working with moms with postpartum depression that using just meds often doesn't work for the long term, because their brain just pushes back to those old patterns right through those meds. So the therapy and meds and interactions really makes a bigger impact. So we've got stress being perceived in the brain. And all day long, the brain is making a certain decision that guides almost everything else. And the brain is deciding safe, unsafe, safe, safe, unsafe, safe, 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 unsafe, unsafe, all day long. The brain is making decisions about what is safe and unsafe. And the degree to which we feel well and safe, we do well. And the degree to which we're feeling unsafe, we struggle to do well. So stressors are perceived in the brain right away. Even before we process them, we feel the stress. Have you ever had the phenomena of having a stress reaction before you even have a thought about it? So all of a sudden, mine comes as hot. I all of a sudden get like a heat flush through me. My brain hasn't even processed what the stressor is yet, but my body says, oh yeah, it's there, right? Some people get a pounding head right away before they even think about the stress, all right? So our brain, stress is perceived in our brain and experienced in the body very quickly, very quickly. Sometimes before we can even reason ourselves out of it, our brain has said unsafe, and we experience stress. And we have things that are hidden. Our blood pressure goes up, yeah? Our heart rate increases, and things that are visible. Some people sweat. Some people start breathing quicker. Some people start drinking water. I'm seeing some stress reactions right now. Okay, Kate, move on. Okay, going to go a little bit deeper just for a minute, and then we'll try to pull out for a little bit. Okay. And then there's the big stressors. So we know from science in recent years that stressors that we experience, and I say we because 2/3 of us have had at least one childhood trauma. The stressors that we experience in our childhood hang with us in our body. One researcher likes to say the body keeps the score. So that the more of these stressors we had as a child, the more likely they are to pop up later. I'll share with you that my dad had some trauma in his childhood, but he's one of these kind of big Irish guys who takes up a room when he walks in, and he's always jovial, and he's always doing well, and he's always happy. And as he's aged, some of these childhood traumas have popped up. I recently asked him, trying to diffuse some tension at the holidays, I said to my mom and dad, "So, what's your favorite memory from Christmas?" And my mother said, "Oh, I think, sitting under the tree and drinking cocoa." And my dad said, "I don't have any positive memories from Christmas. I was learning this in my 50s. Never knew this." By the way, it explained a lot with how he handled Christmas, just saying. And he recounted his many, many stories of his alcoholic father, chopping the top off the Christmas tree by mistake, and just time after time bringing home a chicken instead of a turkey for 20 people for dinner, these kinds of things, right? So these stories that are parts of lots of people's childhoods, right? Life is hard. And then he started recounting his stories being an altar boy, and his face lit up, and he went to a place where he was feeling really, really safe, telling the stories of being an altar boy on Christmas Eve. And that explained a lot about how he sees faith in the church also. So we have them, and they come back sometime at us. And then we work with children and families who've had them. And all our little messy childhood traumas come together in one room. It's not all bad because it's life, but it is hard. And so we really need to recognize our childhood challenges and our young adult challenges that come back and influence our interactions now. Do we all need to go in deep therapy? Probably not, though I think therapy's cool. But it does help to acknowledge them and know that they influence us. Don't kid yourself. And the Center at Harvard, Center on the Developing Child at Harvard, has thought about this for us, and that's how we're talking today about our recovering from our early stress. And one is these individual approaches where we try to build our resilience, and another is the environmental approaches. So there we go again: biopsychosocial, the individual, and the contextual. How do we reduce our stress in our lives? So I'm going to tell you a little bit about a group of professionals, early childhood professionals with Head Start and Early Head Start in Pennsylvania, that a colleague of mine, Bob Whitaker, led and has included me on in some subsequent work, and it's such a privilege. So in the Pennsylvania Head Start Staff Wellness Survey, they wanted to study how early childhood professionals in Head Start and Early Head Start were doing. That's the question. How are they doing? They wanted to assess their needs, but they also had a suspicion that they needed to increase their attention to wellness and develop some approaches to wellness with the goal of improving child outcomes. Yes, of course. So they considered it from multiple perspectives, and Bob Whitaker is an epidemiologist and a public health, in addition to being a developmental pediatrician. And so Bob actually studies obesity and was one of the first person to say, when families kept coming in with children with obesity problems, it's not about the food. It's about the emotional interactions in the home life, right? So he started talking about this. So he really wanted to think about the staff and how they were doing and how well they were and how not well. So he studied workplace stress, economic hardships, and adverse childhood experiences. He asked staff about these three, and every level of staff: assistants, home visitors, teachers, administrators of programs, family service coordinators. He also looked at their mental and physical health indicators, and their functioning. What was their relationship quality like? And he did not study children's learning. That's next steps. But he was so one of our main outcomes that we've looked at is the relationship quality of professionals in their work life. And so the sources of workplace stress were about demands, control, and support. Okay, so can I handle my work demands? Do I have control, autonomy in my job? When I make a decision, can I do it? And do I experience having support? That's what he wanted to know about their workplace. For hardships, it wasn't just about, do you have enough money for cable TV? It was, do you have enough money to pay your utility bills? Do you have access to health care? And a lot of Head Start professionals did not have access to health care. Do you have housing? Have you been homeless at any time? And have you experienced food insecurity? So they went for the big economic hardships. And then trauma. Have you experienced these adverse childhood experiences in your early life? So how did stress impact the well-being of these Head Start staff? So first of all, how common are these stressors? I'm giving a couple examples from a long survey that they did. Only 8% had a lot of economic hardships. But remember, this is utilities, food, housing, okay? It's the biggies, all right? And 63% had none. So economic hardships were there in about 40% of the population, but not overwhelming. And their adverse childhood experiences look just like the national average. Roughly, in this, a matter of fact, that was a little lower. So, 40% had none, and about 60% had some adverse childhood experiences, just like the general population. So they weren't different from the general population in that regard. However, with roughly the same adverse childhood experiences, they had poorer health. So, compared to 8% and it was a national reference, so it was a population that was matched, so it was mostly women, same ages, that kind of thing. 12% had diabetes. High blood pressure, they were higher. Asthma, they were significantly more obese than the comparative population. Had much more lower back pain, which in our field is not surprising, right? And they had higher rates of depression and multiple health problems. So I asked a group of Head Start professionals when we were first sharing this data, so why do you think they have the same amount of trauma from their childhood but have more health problems? Do you know what the audience answered? Pay. Salary. We're struggling. And that makes us sick. So, several of the studies since have focused on depression, have focused on the levels of depression in this population. And I'm going to share with you that this level of depression, this 24% across the different roles, that's higher than in other places. So for example, in Nebraska, we found about an 11%. Though our population was different, it was not all Head Start, it was across roles in early childhood. So it depends on how you cut it up, what you get. But you'll see that because depression is associated with stress, it affects the mind and body, and it affects relationships and learning, we thought it was important to consider looking at. And also the fact that in Head Start, it almost looks epidemic because it's across all roles. Managers were at 25% and assistant teachers at 24%, so they were all similarly high levels of depression. And this is no surprise. As this job stress increased, workplace stress, economic hardships, and adverse childhood experiences, depression increased. That's kind of a research finding, isn't it? Yep, more stress, more depression. And what we found also was that workplace stress and depression both were associated with more teacher-child conflict in relationships. Okay? So teachers reported more conflict with children when they had more workplace stress and higher levels of depression. So at the end of this survey, we asked them if they wanted to tell us anything else. In fact, the words we used were, in the space below, feel free to write anything else you would like to say about the following topics: the stress in your life, your health, your mental well-being, or how you're doing at work. And over half the participants gave us some response. And so I've been analyzing this data and want to share with you some of the things they said about that they offered beyond. Keep in mind, they've just completed 200 questions and they still have things to say about how they're doing. Okay? I know, right? The first and most common response they shared was that they found their work meaningful and purpose in their life. They cited believing in the Head Start mission, sense of competency and efficacy from doing well at work. Can folks in the back read that, or shall I read it to you, that quote? Yeah, I think this wasn't designed for as large a venue. I love working at Head Start. I've worked as both a teacher and a family service worker, and I feel that the work we do is extremely rewarding and beneficial to the community. The first and most common thing they told us was the importance of what they do. And the second most common thing they told us was that they were under financial stress. They weren't making enough money, had low wages, commonly worked a second, sometimes third job, and had general financial hardship. As long as I have worked for Head Start, I have always had to have a second or third job to make ends meet. So we like to think, oh, it's the stress of working with children who live in poverty and families who experience stress, which are really hard, right? Slam on top of it that they cannot take care of their own families. And many of the, there were many combinations of answers people gave, and the most common was that they balanced this meaningful work and stress. My job requires more and more of my time and energy each year with little or no compensation. The main reason I chose to stay with Head Start is I believe in the program and enjoy working with children and families to help them succeed in life. I wish our program showed more care and concern for its staff. So balancing stress and meaningful work. So what we've learned is that for Head Start staff, they leverage the meaning they find in work to thrive in a demanding, low-reward career. So what did we find about what made them healthier? How did they handle so much stress? So we've talked about health and stress, and now a little bit about how they handled and stayed resilient. A friend of mine is a huge comics fan, and she turned me on to Storm. She's been a fan of Storm since her childhood. She was she says, not only is she one of the few women superheroes, but she's the only African-American, or the dark-skinned superhero. We don't know her ethnic origin, actually, but yeah, okay. So we've got this model where we were looking at stress and health and functioning. What made a difference? Well, one of the things we found that made a difference was mindfulness. What do I mean by mindfulness? Paying attention, having awareness on purpose in the present moment, and here's the hard thing, without judgment. Without judgment. I'm going to add here and not talk more about it today, but we also found that spirituality buffered against the effects of stress as well, similarly to mindfulness. It's hard to do spirituality interventions in schools, but yeah. So we know that mindfulness from studies now buffers the effects of stress on health, improves relationships. It is something that can be learned, and it impacts brain functioning. So what did we learn about the Pennsylvania Head Start staff? So and by the way, let me tell you how we measured mindfulness. We gave them a questionnaire and asked them how they handled daily life. So do you find it hard to pay attention in the moment? You know, if they said no, they were more mindful. So we asked them questions. This was not a mindfulness intervention. This was not people who said they meditated. This was dispositional mindfulness. How do you approach the stressors of daily life, okay? Which is what mindfulness interventions teach. But this was about dispositional mindfulness, okay? As their mindfulness increased, depression went down. Now, do we know it was causal? No, we can't. But we know that people who are more dispositionally mindful have lower rates of depression. Across all the stressors, more mindful people had less depression. And look at these differences between the people who are the most mindful are in the blue, the people who are in the least mindful on the red. So the most mindful have lower depression in the context of workplace stress, lower depression in the context of a number of economic hardships, and lower depression in the context of childhood trauma. So in other words, even with high stress, mindfulness buffered against the effects of depression. Subsequent things we found are that more mindful home visitors reported better relationships with families. More mindful teachers have more positive relationships with children and less conflict with children. And one of the studies we've recently done showed that teacher mindfulness is associated with lower conflict with students, which I've already said, but it does that by decreasing depression, at least in part. So depression actually mediates, actually buffers, and is the acting agent for how mindfulness works on relationships. So what does mindful practice look like? What would it look like if we were using mindful practice with children and families? We might be more observant. We might be paying attention, not thinking ahead or thinking back. We might be very present to the stories families are telling us, listening and watching. We might be very aware of the environment. And whatever we're doing and observing, we're not judging. We're being present. We might be feeling pain, because pain is in the moment too. But we're not judging. We also recently found that mindful managers have greater self-efficacy, have greater ability to manage the way their program and their staff need. So let's jump to some other work that's been done where teachers have been taught to practice mindfulness, and early childhood professionals have been taught to practice mindfulness. Does it make a difference? Does it, so if I learn to sit and breathe, will it make a difference, right? Well, there have been some nice studies by Tish Jennings and Lisa Fluke at Madison. Tish is at University of Virginia. Teachers who received a mindfulness intervention reported greater well-being, greater efficacy in their classroom. They did class measures to see how their classroom climate improved. Relationships did not improve necessarily, but the class measures already show kind of ceilinged out warmth in the classroom, right? Yeah. And it didn't really make a difference in instructional, and you also notice that no matter what we happen to do in our field, we can't seem to move those instructional climate scores very easily. But it affected classroom organization, and it's done so in more than one study. So teachers who learn to practice mindfulness have more organized classrooms. I'm thinking some administrators might like that. Okay. Probably most importantly, they started reporting and demonstrating greater self-compassion. They had more compassion for themselves in their role. They had less burnout, less time-related stress, probably because they were a little more organized in the classroom, I don't know. They had fewer physical symptoms. This is really important. So they reported fewer physical ailments and fewer psychological symptoms. Specifically, they reported less depression. So it seems that not only are naturally mindful people or dispositionally mindful people more successful at buffering stress, but you can learn to do it and it helps. So what I'm careful to say about mindfulness, because it's the new hot thing, just like carbohydrate diets were, and now we're on to something else. Fat diets were before that. It's a tool. And it's a powerful tool. So it makes sense to take it on and learn a little. And there are so many ways to mindfulness. There are so many different tools, and it's worth exploring. For me, I actually went to mindfulness-based stress reduction, the clinically proven method, and I went for a program for people who had pain. I did not have pain, but I knew it would work for me. Or I did not have physical pain, right? And in fact, it did. But a lot of the things they taught didn't work for me. My entree was yoga. Yoga for me was magic. I couldn't be anywhere else but in my body or my knees would give. Okay? Yoga was my way in. For others, it's mindful breathing. For others, it's mindful walking in nature. But increasing the amount of time we spend to caring for ourselves mindfully during the day and practicing that in our work seems to be able to make a difference in our lives. As I mentioned recently, there's been an emphasis on not just mindfulness. As a matter of fact, almost all the work with teachers and with education professionals is shifting to mindful self-compassion. So what does it mean to have mindful self-compassion? Self-compassion is noticing, I got to slide down a little bit here, that you are in a moment of stress and taking a moment to take care of yourself. And so it includes being kind to yourself. You're stressed right now. It's okay. And recognizing common humanity. Sometimes, when we're under incredible stress, we think, no one in the world has ever felt like this. No one has ever experienced this kind of stress. Yesterday, we played a game called the Brain Architecture Game, and child after child had a natural disaster, to the point where we started almost giggling a little because I was like, really? That many natural disasters? But so many children and families in the world have regular natural disasters, experience more than one in their life. So common humanity means stepping back and saying, okay, this is super stressful, but having your internet go down in your hotel the night before your keynote is something a lot of people have felt, and there's probably worse. Yeah. But we do that, don't we, with these stressors? It's like, I'm going from here today to the funeral of my sister-in-law's father. She lost her mother 3 months ago, and she's feeling this way right now. Losing two parents together is too much. No one has ever felt this pain, right? And we know that's not the case. We know it is. And so when you have self-compassion, you have this little thinker in your head step back and say, oh, this is part of being human. This happens. And then taking a moment to be mindful and take care of yourself. I want to see if I can scroll down and do this with you. I didn't test this beforehand. Okay. So I'm going to show you a little mindful self-compassion technique that's used. You can participate or just listen, whatever feels safe and good for you. So when you are in a moment of pain, and that pain can be, my internet's down, which seems small, but when you're in it, it's not, right? Or you've just had a fender bender, or you've had a loss. You can touch yourself in some way that feels comforting. Some people like to hug themselves. Some people like to touch their chest or touch their face. And you can say, this is hard, or this hurts. Some people might say, ouch. But other people feel this way. And despite how it feels, I'm not alone. Or we all struggle in our lives. And then you take a moment to be kind to yourself. You can say things like, may I be kind to myself? May I accept myself as I am? May I give myself the compassion that I need? May I forgive myself? May I learn to accept myself as I am? May I be strong? May I be safe? When we think about what self-compassion is, It's the compassion you would show to a good friend, to a close loved one. And we show it toward ourselves. Because you wouldn't say, hopefully, to a close friend, oh, get over it, when they share their pain. Right? But we say that to ourselves. Or, common thing we say to ourselves, oh my God, you're such an idiot. Right? I'm such an idiot. We hesitate to say that to someone we love, yeah? Yeah. Treating yourself as you would a close friend, loved one. That's what self-compassion is. The good news is there's a lot of research being done in this regard. The same people who've been teaching mindfulness for years have shifted to mindful self-compassion with populations such as teachers because they realize how much we don't have self-compassion. I'm gonna go quickly through emotional intelligence because I feel like you know a lot about it, but it's really an important part of our lives to enhance. And here's the good news. The same things we worry about with kids for emotional intelligence, we need to worry about for ourselves. Why worry about, do you like that? Why worry about emotional intelligence? Yeah. So emotions serve a very important role. Look at this little guy, how worried he is. But he is in good hands with Joel Mara, I will tell you that. But emotions motivate us to take action and avoid danger. They basically are the source of all life. I love when people say, is it emotional or cognitive? Yes, yes. Very little difference, very little ability to separate. I sometimes beat up on that Rene Descartes guy who got us into thinking we can separate, mind and body and emotion and thinking. Yeah, not done. Sorry. It was a good philosophy, but not working. So when we think about emotion literacy, we think about experience, recognition, and responding. Because eventually emotion goes from the internal to the social, right? How we don't separate social and emotional learning in early childhood. We are geniuses. Okay. So the first is that we need to recognize that our emotions are experienced in our body, but expressed in our behavior. And we need to show and share them. I had a little toddler when I first started teaching kindergarten, and sometimes I would have no sleep. And I would come in the next morning with my group of 20 with no aide, 3/4 boys, and I would say, good morning, boys and girls. So Mrs. Gallagher got very little sleep last night, and she's feeling very, very cranky. So if I get fussy, it's not about you. It's about Mrs. Gallagher's not having enough sleep. And you could see them go, because first of all, they'd heard that story before. They all had mothers at home, yeah, and many of them had toddler sibs. And second, phew, because every time she makes that look, I think it's about me, right? Yeah, because kids don't know. So we understand that we're experiencing emotion in our body, and it gets expressed. Knowing that, being grown up about it. Aren't we lucky we get to be grown-ups? Adulting now, right, we call it. Okay. So the next step that children learn, and that we know but struggle with, is that we need to recognize emotions in ourselves and others. Very often we zip through our days, we've got one emotion, we don't know what someone else's is, and we don't take the time to find out. Not that we always have the time. I once said hello to somebody in a mall, and I was talking to a friend, and I said, hello, how are you? And the person said, oh, hi, and whipped by. And the friend I was with said, doesn't care much to see how you're doing. And I said, well, that's fine. But we don't always take the time to know how people are. We say, how you doing? Right? It's a good thing to do to improve our own well-being and that of others. Now, it's not that we can have the time every day to someone says, how you doing? And say, well, funny you should ask. And we go into dry. We don't always have time for the big story. But we can be honest. We can be honest. I'm hanging in there, but I'm not feeling great. Yeah. Or I feel wonderful. How about you? I don't, right? I'm sorry, because I'd like you to feel wonderful too. Emotional responding, realizing that emotions have causes and effects and that people may feel and respond differently in different situations. One thing that makes you happy does not make me happy, right? And recognizing those things, recognizing those things. Here's a quote I love by Maya Angelou. I've learned that you can tell a lot about a person by the way she or he handles these three things: a rainy day, lost luggage, and tangled Christmas tree lights. I would add down internet at the hotel. Increasing our emotional intelligence, reminding ourselves of the things we're trying to get children to learn that we still don't always achieve in our moments of stress, because emotional intelligence is one of the things that goes out the window when we're under stress sometimes. So recognizing the importance of those for ourselves and supporting it in others. So we've talked about health and stress and individual resilience, specifically some ways to be mindful, self-compassionate, and emotionally intelligent. And now I want to talk quickly in a little bit. You're going to cut me off, right, Deb, as soon as I should stop, because I know I'm at my time, but okay. So one model I've been talking a bit about for systemic resilience and handling our workforce structures is something called the sanctuary model. Sandra Bloom in Philadelphia at Drexel has developed a system whereby organizations examine how they support well-being. How are we doing with supporting our workforce? It's been used extensively in public health and social service agencies. I actually have a colleague friend who's been through the process and said it was transformational of their public health department and the way they treated each other and the way they felt treated in their workplace. An organization that is a place of safety. So the premise here is, when you're already a person who experiences stress, and you come to work that's intensive people work with children and families, many of whom live in poverty and stress in the context of disability, workplace cannot be one more stressful place. Yeah, I know. I'm seeing everybody look at each other. Okay. It can't add to it. It has to be a safe place for the workers, or the work can't get properly done. So if you are a sanctuary organization, you all agree that growth and change are essential. Not just a manager agreeing about growth and change. Everybody buys into growth and change. It's a democracy. People have a voice. Clearly, she doesn't work in government, okay? Social responsibility. Everyone owns that we are socially responsible. Open communication, open communication, open communication. People have to be able to share real things and real thoughts in appropriate ways. There's a commitment to social learning, that they consistently are learning how to get along with each other and no one gives up. Emotional intelligence, and surprisingly maybe, nonviolence. So a sanctuary organization has to be a place where people's, so they can't get yelled at. They can't get demeaned, excuse me. Okay. I'm going to skip through this little part here about some of the things. Well, I'm actually going to just say these are some of the steps that Sandra Bloom takes organizations through. She has books, by the way, and so you can look up her books and learn more about how to bring a safe space to your organization. But respecting process and feedback, being emotionally well-regulated, and really, really focuses on communication and respectful communication. Research and practice considerations for features of workplace support. So what does it mean to be a supportive organization? What can your organization do with everyone's participation? This is not just about the manager being a good person to work for. It's about everyone committing to a well workplace, though leadership is essential. It needs to be relationship focused. We focus on, with children and families, relationships, 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 and often pay little attention to our own relationships in the workplace or Engage in relationships that I call the team approach. We're on that team. They're on that team. We're not playing with them. Okay. Happens in so many workplaces. There need to be workplace health and well-being supports. I used to have a teacher in a childcare program I directed who scheduled herself. She never got sick, and she thought it was baloney that everyone else got to stay home sick. So she scheduled 1 day a month sick. While the inside of me said, whoa, that's not right. By the same token, it kept her healthy, and she never missed work. So, and she scheduled it. So I got, it was interesting, and she is a very healthy person. Okay. Our workplaces need to be trauma-informed. We're talking about recognizing the trauma that children and families have experienced. We know all of us come with some. And we need to respect that so does the person across. There's this great thing popping up on Facebook that says, everybody has pain, be kind, right? Everybody experiences pain, be kind, and we need to learn more. We don't have to know what each other's trauma is all the time, though sometimes that helps. It helped me understand my dad to learn about his. We need to enhance trauma awareness, and there's a project right now going on in Delaware County, Pennsylvania, where all Head Start and preschool, so all the public school pre-K and Head Start are doing a trauma awareness education program. And I've heard from a few people here who are also participating in a trauma informed training. So we just need to understand it better in our workplace. Finally, we need to be compensated properly as a field. The typical childcare worker is paid less than a dog trainer. I love my dog, and I want dog trainers to be compensated properly, but I feel like an early childhood teacher should kind of make the same or a little more. We have the worthy work and still unlivable wages. And we've learned that we haven't made much progress, but Minnesota's doing pretty well in terms of changes in preschool teachers' earnings in the last 6 years. They are at the level of, I want to get this, slight increases in preschool teachers' earnings, and that encompasses also folks in the public school. And slight increases in child care earnings, which most of the states do not, okay? Most of the states do not. Matter of fact, they've gone down in child care worker earnings, which is hard to imagine, and this is relative to the economy, of course. And then compensation strategies, and again, Minnesota is edging forward. Only one little state is making great progress in workforce compensation strategies. Oklahoma. Is that great? Yeah. The rest are kind of straggling along, and all the red states are halted. They are not making progress in compensation strategies. So this is something we need to work at nationally. It's why I really encourage you all to get really good at talking about what our field does, really good at communicating specifics about the brain benefits to children, about the developmental needs of young children, and being very, very clear with policymakers about that. Every single one of us should be talking with and influencing our local and state policymakers as much as we possibly can. And we have Teach, and we have child care wages that are helping move this along, but they are minimal. I say this because I can't bring up that we are not making enough money and then introduce the fact that, you know, there are a few things going on. But let me just step back a little bit and talk. I talk a lot about the Abecedarian study, which was a North Carolina longitudinal study of high-quality year-round child care for poor kids. All done? Okay. Oh, 5? Okay, cool. Okay, I'm 5. Oh yeah, 5's easy. Okay. Here's the thing about the Abecedarian professionals. So we say, how did it make such a difference? How did this intervention from 0 to 5 that was just great child care and not much else, how are they healthier adults and better adults? And just one thing to note that no one talks about. The teachers were local individuals who were trained and got education, free college education if they pursued it. They made a living wage, had benefits, job security, and year-round employment guaranteed without layoffs. They were state employees in this. You think that didn't make a difference? It did. So I just mentioned advocacy and policy. And I encourage you to pick the thing you're most passionate about, or the one or two things, and develop an elevator pitch. A short statement can fit in the time of an elevator trip is what it refers to. About 1 minute or 2 minutes, most, of why what you do is so important. Think about what you can say, write it down, practice it, where you can say it, to whom you can say it, and how often you say it. I was teaching an online master's class in early childhood. Only about a third of the students were early childhood majors. The rest were from other fields of education. And I was talking to a social services worker who works with a teenage pregnancy program. And the governor, she called me excitedly to tell me one day, she said, Dr. Gallagher, the governor visited my program today. And I said, whoa, that's great. She says, yes, he wanted to see our teenage pregnancy program. And somehow I ended up alone in a room with him, and I gave the whole story to him. I told him how high quality early childhood is so important if we don't want to see, because these women were in the penal system, if we don't want to see their children in the juvenile penal system, we need to really up the level of early childhood, and this is what quality means. She goes on. And I said, whoa, Mary, fantastic. How did he react? She goes, well, he was pretty receptive. He liked it. I said, Mary, congratulations. That was quite an achievement. And she said, oh, no, Dr. Gallagher, I didn't know this 6 weeks ago. So, yeah, it was great. It was a good moment. But that's the point. We need to have something. I think she probably rambled. I think her elevator speech wasn't refined. But, So, systemic resilience, workplaces, compensation, policy and advocacy, building up our stories that we tell. It's not enough to do our work. Sorry, folks. I used to say that. I do the work. I don't need to advocate. Sorry. Those days are over. Individual resilience. In the meantime, till our systems get well, making sure we're well and taking care of our health and stress. And thank you.